Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball!
Welcome back, everyone, to the Don Sullivan Show, the show where we discuss all things science, technology, and computing on a level that can be understood and absorbed by your average American teenager. I'm your host, Don Sullivan, but let me introduce you to my partner, Jersey Steve. Say hello, Steve.
Greetings from the Garden State, everyone. And I just want to remind everyone that today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service, whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware. License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. Learn more at licensefortress.com. And as always, please support our producer by visiting axtinc.com. That's AXTINK.com. Subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation, as well as run our website, all while researching a cure for baldness. Back to you, Don.
So I'd also like to introduce you to Jason Hahn. I've had the privilege and honor of meeting Jason recently, and I quickly discovered that he's a true expert on the subject of horology, which is best described as the science of time and the art of creation of timepieces. Jason was incredibly generous with his time when I first met him, and we're thrilled to have him on the Don Sullivan Show. Jason, could you just give us a quick summary of your background and how you became a horologist?
Don, Steve, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I always balk at being called an expert in anything, really, because ultimately I just like watches, and I'm just kind of a watch nerd and enthusiast, and that's really kind of how it started. So I, without dating myself too much, grew up when Swatch watches first really hit the market, and I just remember being a kid, and you weren't cool unless you had a Swatch watch. And so I remember my cousin and I and my little brother, we all were pining for the Swatch watches. They were on our Christmas lists and everything. And that was probably the impetus of this obsession, and kind of graduated from Swatches to probably Casios when in my later pre-adolescent years, moving on to fashion brands. I also lived through the fossil watch boom, and I have the square tins to prove that. But ultimately, I got to a point where I don't recall what it was, but I came to this fascination of mechanical timepieces, of just the idea of springs, gears, and levers all working in concert to move hands across a dial that can be accurate to within seconds per day. And that was just really fascinating and intriguing to me. And I remember my very first automatic watch was a Seiko 5, back when they were around $100. And it just kind of evolved, or some may say devolved from there. And ultimately now I am a client specialist with a local jewelry group, and we do sell some high-end timepieces, and that's kind of the world that I'm in.
Yeah, and you warned me that this would become an obsession because there's such compelling aspects to it, and it is absolutely true. But first, folks, I again, at our lawyer's insistence, have to read out the obligatory disclaimer waiver before we get into some of the questions. So, All statements by the host and the guests on the Don Sullivan Show are the personal opinions of the host and the guests, all who agree that the following content is the property of Zanalytics, LLC, to be used publicly and exclusively on the Don Sullivan Show. And as long as everybody's good and everybody is nodding their heads, let's go on to some real questions.
I
So,
think we're
Jason,
good.
yeah, I think we're good. So, Jason, here's the question. When did time start? That's kind of a silly question, but I want the vast audience of the Don Sullivan Show to understand when did both humans start taking notice of time, and when did someone start creating some timepieces? Now, I've read that somewhere in the mid-Paleolithic time frame, 30,000 years BCE, there's some evidence of some primitive timekeeping. And there's even some archaeological evidence in Babylonian Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, around 4000 BCE, that there are actually some devices that kept time. What do you know about this history?
To be perfectly honest, not a whole lot. I mean, everybody knows about hourglasses and sundials, and I, for one, remember making a sundial in elementary school as a science project.
Did you win? Did you win the science fair?
I did not. I took a purely mathematical approach or not mathematical, just a logical approach, and just drew essentially a clock face. But even sundials are much more complex than just sticking a stick on a plank and drawing a clock on it. You have to account for your particular longitude and latitude, and yeah, but it was a fun experience. But yeah, in terms of keeping time, I think we as humans, probably from the beginning of time, no pun intended, have had a fascination with the passage of time and keeping track of it. So the aforementioned things like hourglasses, sundials, water clocks, even, and even before that, just kind of tracking stars in the sky and figuring out what time of year is the best time to plant your seeds to get a good crop the following harvest season.
It
Then
seems like such a simple subject, but so much of our modern day, and by that I mean the last 1,000 or 1,500 years, our modern day economy has been controlled by the understanding and the awareness of time. Everything from
9 to 5, baby.
well, I mean, just time zones and the struggles that the railroads went through in the 1800s to keep schedules and so on, and that was one of the factors that didn't allow them to actually be economically successful, and so on. And so we've really reached this point in time and again, we'll stay with that pun continuously here today, I think. But and by the way, this really happened. I just met two dogs. And I'm out in Western Colorado, and this guy's two dogs were named Rolex and Timex. That's not a joke. I'm not making that up. That's what he said.
Rolex and Timex.
So
Those are kind of different, very different brands.
Well,
are they not?
And I can say it was very timely for this particular episode. But
oh boy,
yeah, bump. Jason, I would like to actually talk about the industry a little bit, though, and I think I would be naive to believe, and this is something that Steve knows very well, and the audience knows that I'm not particular. I'm very cynical in this regard. But with the plethora of fine brands that are available from every level, from the inexpensive timepieces that we kind of just mentioned to those timepieces having the equivalent value of a Rolls Royce, as one of the more recent television shows quipped, that there isn't any industry consolidated control. And that seems to me to be that there is a legitimate stylistic independence, which is why there's so much artistic diversity and engineering diversity in the luxury watch industry, as well as the more mundane functional watch industry itself, if you break them up like that. So it just doesn't seem like there's any equivalent of a De Beers that's controlling the whole thing. Am I wrong, or am I being naive?
No, I mean, it does seem like it's a very democratic industry in that sense. And there are a whole lot of independent watch brands doing some fantastic, amazing things. Um, but there are also large conglomerate corporate groups that controls numerous brands, and so it does kind of run the gamut in terms of representation of different sectors within the industry. Um, and I think that that does allow for that diversity that you talked about. You can get anything from a $15 digital watch at Walmart to spending seven, sometimes eight figures on a timepiece. It's pretty incredible to think about, but I think
That
it's
really is
because
the
of that
epitome
freedom.
of free enterprise across the entire board. I've joked for many years, and on this show in particular, that the only two non-monopolized industries left in the United States are hotels and beer. But I think that's really true to a large extent in the watch industry overall, because this, again, diversity is just so huge. So it's something that is really a breath of fresh air in so many different ways. So one of the things that also fascinates me is the watch industry has almost its own language. So if you could explain to the audience, aside from these complications, little watch jargon there, which amateurs like me still refer to as features, um, where that language came from, and then also what distinguishes a great brand from a more mid-range timepiece, say.
So a lot of the terminology, I think, has its roots in, well, I mean, if you ask for a consensus of the general public of where some of the best watches are made, a lot of people will default to Switzerland, and that is where a lot of kind of the luxury watch industry was really kind of started. And as such, there is a lot of French influence in terms of the naming of particular parts of watches, and the general jargon that we use, I think, can be traced back to a lot of French words. Um, and Don, oh, sorry. As far as so complications for those uninitiated, essentially in watch speak, a complication is anything that a watch does outside of telling the time. A lot of watches that people may have has a date window that will scroll through 1 through 31 to show you what date of the month it is. That technically is a complication because it's something beyond just the hours, minutes, and seconds.
I'm bad
Um,
at setting that on one of my watches. it's it's a complication because it's complicated for me to do it because I'm a dummy.
uh, yeah, we can spend some time after the show, and I can give you a little quick tutorial. It's
Appreciate
once you figure out how it's done, it's not that actually complicated, but there are very complicated complications. Um, One of the most kind of extreme examples is the idea of a perpetual calendar. So we have graduated from a simple date window that just scrolls through 1 through 31 with every 24 hours to a watch that can keep track of not just your seconds, minutes, and hours, but also days of the week, the month, keep tracks of how many days that month has, whether it's 30 or 31, or in the case of February, 28, and to the point where it can even keep track of leap years. So every 4 years, it'll automatically assign 29 days to February as opposed to 28. And so a perpetual calendar watch, once you set it, doesn't really need to be touched as far as time or date setting for potentially 100 years plus. Um, and so to think
That's
of
amazing.
all
that
of
is
that being
crazy.
accomplished with a series of springs, gears, and levers all kind of working. Somebody sat down and figured out how to make it all work.
Now, are these complications such as the perpetual calendar typically found on the high-end watches?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think about the engineering know-how and just the manufacturing prowess that you would need to create something like that. It's not something that you can just draw up in a couple days. It takes years and years of development, and fitting all that in a timepiece that's maybe 40 some odd millimeters across and you know about a centimeter thick. It's pretty incredible, and the more skill required to produce those types of pieces obviously is going to increase the price and the position in the market. So I think some of the most affordable perpetual calendars on the market that you can find are well into the five figures. You can probably find ones in the like maybe mid-teens, maybe 15, 16,000 for an entry level perpetual calendar, so to speak, and on up to six figures plus, depending on the materials.
Possible stupid question. Oh, sorry, Don. I was just going to say, uh, so some watches are automatic. Some seem to move when you move. Some are solar powered. Some are battery powered. What are most of the high end watches? Like a perpetual calendar watch, how would that typically operate as far as power?
So, in the world of wristwatches today, broad categorization, there are quartz watches and mechanical watches. Quartz watches are going to be the ones that are electrically powered. So whether that electricity is provided by a button cell battery, is that a train whistle?
That is, I'm outside and there's a train going by,
Oh,
but we're very real here at the Don Sullivan Show, so just continue on. Because, Steve,
all
you
right.
actually got my next question anyway, so go ahead, Jason. Hit us with
Yeah.
it.
So as I was saying, quartz watches are electrically powered, whether it's with a battery, a solar cell, a combination of the two. Um, and then mechanical watches are powered by a spring that is wound up. And within mechanical watches, we can have either automatic or manually wound. A manually wound mechanical watch means you have to provide the power to that spring through the crown. You have to wind it typically every day, and the recommendation is usually winding the watch every day at the same time, a certain number of turns of the crown. An
Are they
automatic
boxes
watch.
if you're keeping them? Sorry to interrupt again,
No,
Jason.
no,
Do they have devices where if you're not wearing that watch every day, it'll kept it wound for you?
there are. So now, in a manually wound watch, that's not going to do you any good because that's not going to turn the crown for you. The other type of mechanical watches are automatic watches, which have a weighted rotor attached to the movement itself. And that rotor is utilizing the kinetic motion of you just moving your wrist around day to day to keep that spring wound up. And most people are not sedentary enough to not wind the watch. So just wearing a watch regularly will generally and typically keep it wound. And those of us that have many automatic watches, we're not able to kind of cycle through them often enough to wear them to the point where they're staying wound up. And so some people do opt to use watch winders, is what they're called. They're essentially cases that have a cushion that you mount your watch into, and a series of motors will rotate that watch for you to ensure that that spring stays wound up. And in the case of a perpetual calendar watch, that is something that you would want, because if you can imagine trying to set all of those days, dates, and years, it can be a little bit of a headache. And so typically, I personally don't own any watch winders because I also don't own any perpetual calendar watches. But the moment that I do, I'm going to be investing in a watch winder because I do not want to have to deal with setting that if it ever dies.
So, is there a detrimental effect to not winding them if they require that kind of winding or not moving them? It is utterly amazing to me in the few that I have at the moment that you literally can just shake your wrist around and they start working.
I like
And
that.
but is there a detrimental effect to them not running?
From my experience, there are two main schools of thought: yes and no. Some people will say that a watch is designed to run, and that keeping the lubricants kind of flowing through consistent use is good for the watch. The other camp says that constantly having it running is just increasing wear and tear on the internal components and is going to expedite the need for service. I generally fall into the camp of if a watch dies and sits for, a couple weeks, it's not the end of the world. Um, Now, if it's sitting in a drawer for 2-3 years, then perhaps we might have some detrimental effects to the lubricants, maybe gumming up or settling in places that they're not supposed to be, uh, or out of places where they are supposed to be. But generally speaking, I personally don't believe that letting a watch sit not running has too much detrimental effect.
You have to do maintenance on those types of watches, kind of like a car. I imagine if you're spending 15, 20 grand on a watch, if it needs a checkup after a while, is that how it works?
So yeah, absolutely. As we mentioned, a mechanical watch is just a series of springs, gears, and levers all turning and clicking and doing their thing inside of the watch. And over time, friction has its effect. Lubricants can kind of break down and wear out. And so every mechanical watch does need a service from time to time. Service intervals can range anywhere from 3 to 5 years to 10 plus years. And really, with the advent of modern synthetic lubricants and machining techniques to and different ways of really designing a movement to try to minimize friction as much as possible, has really lengthened that time frame of how often you need to service a watch. But essentially, a complete service of a watch would involve sending your watch into a watchmaker or a service center. They would take the watch completely apart. Every single part of that movement is disassembled and cleaned, reassembled, relubricated. Servicing of a watch is something that is generally recommended. There's a lot of parallels between cars and watches. And just like a car needs an oil change from time to time, a watch needs a service from time to time. Now, the biggest difference that I say is with a car, it's preventative maintenance. You want to stay ahead of any issues that may occur, and so you do your oil changes based on time or mileage. With a watch, most watchmakers that I've kind of talked to will say you don't really need to maintain a watch or service it uh, unless you start having performance issues. And so when you see that your watch is not keeping time like it's supposed to be, or it's not running for as long as it's supposed to, then it may be time to send it in for servicing.
What are the most delicate parts that you would say? What are the things that you have to really be careful of? Like, for instance, I've seen a watch recently that actually is 2-time, right? And it shows you the time on the face in 2 different places, which is just absolutely amazing that those things can work in concert together. And I would think that they're very, very delicate mechanisms in there. Are they more prone to deterioration, or is there something that the watch owner of that high-end watch should be really careful of?
Not particularly. I think with the advancements that we've had in just general manufacturing and watchmaking and engineering of movements, they've gotten pretty robust where, general day-to-day activities for the most part are not going to have too much of an adverse effect on the watch itself. The two main, there are probably 3 main things that we should keep in mind because there are, as you said, small delicate parts. One would be shock. Dropping a watch on the floor, aside from denting up your case or scratching it, can throw some of the gearing out of whack. So a severe shock, like a drop onto the floor. I've even heard some instances of playing certain sports and the G forces involved, like if you're playing baseball or hitting a ball with a golf club can generate some shock waves that can potentially have some adverse effects. Um, the other thing would be water incursion. And while many watches today have a uh, pretty robust level of water resistance, there are some watches that's less of a priority, particularly if they're a dressier watch. And so there are watches that you can and you know will not have any worries with swimming with, but there are some watches where I would say you probably shouldn't, and maybe just washing your hands is as close to water as those pieces should get. And then the last thing would be magnetism. So, Don, you were asking what the most delicate part of a watch movement is, and I would say that it's the balance wheel and the hairspring. So we talked about how in a mechanical watch, it's really about controlling the release of energy of that spring, and that is done through the balance wheel. Because if you let a spring go by itself, it's just going to unwind or um, release its tension all at once. And with a watch, you want to avoid that. You want to have it be a controlled release, and that's done by the balance wheel or the escapement. And there's a very, very fine spring, a coiled spring um, that controls the oscillation or that holds the balance wheel so that it can oscillate back and forth. Depending on the material that spring is made out of, it can be susceptible to magnetism. And so that's why a lot of movement manufacturers have gone to anti-magnetic or amagnetic materials, silicon being a very common one, so that having a watch magnetized is less of an issue.
So that's incredibly fascinating. And I would point out that so many of the major promotions are focused on superstar athletes these days. And what you were saying is it might not be the best practice to use a $20,000, $50,000 watch when you are swinging a golf club at 120 miles an hour. It may not have as long a lifespan, that particular watch, as otherwise you would want. And the average.
It's good for the commercial, though.
It's great.
It looks great in the commercial, Pod.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on how good of a golfer you are. For me, I probably wouldn't need to worry too much, but and that's actually a marketing thing that for a lot of brands, where they say that they've built their watches to a level where it can withstand even those levels of extreme shock.
Wasn't there a G-Shock watch?
G-Shock is a Casio. Yeah, so it's a sub brand of a Casio, and they were designed to be waterproof, shock resistant. But they're digital quartz watches, so not.
Yeah, these aren't Rolexes or I don't think any come with a perpetual calendar or at least not in that sense.
Now, one brand in particular that comes to mind that does sponsor a lot of kind of athletes is Richard Mille. They are a Ferrari sponsor for F1, and they also make kind of signature pieces for guys like Bubba Watson, I believe Rafael Nadal. So intended to be able to withstand things like professional level golfers and tennis players and F1 racing. Although I doubt any F1 drivers are wearing actual wristwatches while driving.
Yeah, I'd probably want to keep my hands free.
Just extra weight.
So moving to a sort of different sub-subject in this area, the social subject. What do you think it says about a person? Because it seems to be something that's becoming even more than vehicles, a attribute of a person's rise in social strata. Certainly it is in Silicon Valley, but I think it is all over the world. Do you think it really is something that is driving a sort of new social way of thinking, or am I right in that, or am I just sort of over analyzing it?
Like the status symbol, like you're
Yeah,
a Rolex
yeah.
guy, or is that what you're thinking? That's been around though. I don't know. I'm curious what Jason thinks of
But I
that.
think it's becoming more.
It may be. I mean, as Steve mentioned, I don't think it's necessarily a new phenomenon. The Rolex as a status symbol or as kind of an achievement piece has long been kind of a trope in the industry. Uh, I would say that probably with the uh, proliferation of things like social media and just digital media in general, and how far-reaching influence can have from just about anybody these days, um, probably has kind of exacerbated that particular aspect. And when I see people wearing high-end watches, generally I kind of put it into two camps. There are the watch enthusiasts who really do appreciate what went into the timepiece that they're wearing, and then there are the ones that they may know nothing about watches, and all that they care about is that it has a brand name on the dial, and
Kind of
it
the biggest, shiniest, nouveau
blingiest.
rich.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
blingy.
It's a status symbol. It's like I got my AP or my Patek Philippe, or the old standard, the Rolex. And I always tell people there are certain brands that I can see on somebody's wrist and know right away that they're a watch enthusiast, and there are other brands they may not know that,
I'm
next
curious,
thing.
like what are watches you could see on someone where you're like, oh, they really know like what are brands, what are watch people brands, I guess.
Sure. There are a lot. There are more than the status symbol watches. Um, a lot of the brands that we carry at our store, everything from Grand Seiko to Glashütte Original, Breguet, Blancpain. Um, those are kind of prestige level watches. Even something as entry level as something like a Tudor, or really almost anything that is not a well recognized commercial brand, um, but is a mechanical watch. I think it takes a certain amount of, or it takes a certain type of person to go out and spend six, seven, eight, $15,000 on a timepiece that the average Joe on the street wouldn't know what it is. Um, and that's the true watch enthusiast doesn't really care, because they
Yeah,
know
it's
what it
not
is.
just a status symbol. So is Rolex still the top dog as far as status symbol, or is that an oversimplification on my part?
My perception, and again, my viewpoint's a little bit skewed because I am surrounded by watches and watch people most of the time. But my general perception is that for the vast general public, Rolex is the watch. Um, and they've held that kind of prestige and status symbol, status for quite some time. And there are a lot of people in the world that think, oh, Rolex is the best watch you can buy, which is not necessarily the case. It's actually pretty far from it. There are a lot of watches and a lot of watchmakers that are doing much more impressive things. Uh, all that to say that Rolex makes a fantastic product. They're even better at marketing it, and so yeah. To answer your question, yes and no, depending on who you ask.
So that goes back to my point before about athletes, particularly Tiger and his um his his association with Rolex and so on, golfing.
Yeah, and bigger brands will have ambassadors. Basically, they are paid by the brand to represent them, much like a sponsorship, if you will. And part of their agreement is that they will only be seen in public wearing that brand, and in return, they get paid probably monetarily and in watches. which is also very nice.
Just wait, Don. Wait till this baby comes out. They're going to be calling. We'll decide if what they're offering us is good enough. But that would certainly be nice. That's interesting. I wonder, has the fact that everyone has time on a smartphone or the increased adoption of smart watches, which I don't have one, but occasionally I do pick up my phone and look at it for the time, even though I'm wearing a watch, which is really dumb, but it's just kind of a habitual thing. Is that impacting watch sales or the entire the industry at all? Has that made an impact?
I don't think so. I think it's the way that I see it, to kind of go back to the automotive parallels. It's kind of like internal combustion versus EVs. When EVs really started kind of coming into the mainstream, there were a contingent of people who were, EV is the future. We're going to kill off internal combustion engines by a certain year. The sales will be banned, and EVs are so much better for everything. But there's always going to be
not at this house. I like to hear the roar of the engine.
Yeah, exhaust fumes and manual transmissions, and there's always that contingent of people that really do appreciate that. The romance of being connected to something mechanically. And I think that watches, if anything, I think smartwatches really got people back into getting used to something on their wrist, because, there was probably a time between when smartphones or cell phone, mobile phones in general kind of came on the scene, and then smartwatches came about, that maybe watch sales at that time may have dipped. I don't know. I wasn't in the industry at that time, because now everybody has a clock in their pocket. But then people started wearing Apple watches or their Samsung smartwatches, and they're like, okay, I'm used to having something on my wrist, but now I don't want to be connected to everything all the time, and I kind of want something nicer, and
of a statement. Yeah, you can only go so. They only look so, and I know they make gold versions, and you can kind of dress them up, but they only look so good. You can only get so dressy with them, in my opinion, at least.
And I also think you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but coming out of COVID, given the amount of discretionary money that, well, first of all, that people saved, but secondly, that they just got from all various different resources, different sources, that is, that this industry itself benefited tremendously. And I think it's probably, coming off that peak right now, but is also this increased desire for more and more of these, not just status symbols, but these high-end collectibles.
Yeah, absolutely. COVID was a crazy time. Like you said, the government was giving us money and we couldn't go anywhere or do anything with it. And so a lot of people took to picking up other hobbies, whether it's buying a new car, and watches definitely did benefit from that. So I would surmise that if you've looked at a watch chart for luxury watch sales, 2020 to maybe 2022 had a really anomalous spike, and that's also when secondary watch prices for some of the harder to get pieces or more desired pieces really went through the roof, to basically unsustainable levels, and we are kind of seeing that market level back out. But yeah, it definitely broadens the exposure for a lot of people, because again, you're stuck at home, and what are you doing? You're on the computer watching content on YouTube, taking in podcasts,
watching the
like
Don Sullivan Show, or
exactly
whatever.
And hopefully that's what everybody should be doing.
Yeah,
and free money coming in, and what else are you gonna do? Hey, I should get one of those.
Jason,
nice...
is there
so Jason?
Sorry, Don. I was just going to ask, is there a good time to, aside from when you want one or when you need one, is there an ideal time of year to buy a watch? Like with cars, some guys say, oh, you got to go when they're about to get the new inventory in. That's when you get it's just any time?
It really is. I mean, we do see seasonal spikes based on holidays and other events that kind of happen. So in the watch world, there are some watch shows. One of the biggest ones is called Watches and Wonders. It happens the first week of April every year in Geneva. And that's when a lot of the bigger names in the industry release their novelties for the year. That being said, that's not the best time to try to buy one because that's when everybody's trying to buy one, and the demand far exceeds the supply, and it's usually not until about 8 months to a year after a new watch is released that they really become a little bit more readily available. But watch brands release watches throughout the year. They're not beholden to a particular timeline. It's not like cars in that way where every model year there's something. Um, Typically bigger watch brands will have something every year, but it's not set in stone when they're going to do it. So just buy what you love. If you enjoy a certain piece and you think it's going to be a great addition to the collection, pick it up and enjoy it.
What excites you that's coming down the pike, Jason? What's the next big thing that you're really looking forward to?
That's a fantastic question. I don't know if there's any kind of really big thing. Again, Watches and Wonders just happened a couple months ago in April, and so that would probably have been the thing that I would be most interested to see what the brands are releasing. Um, but like I said, it is pretty consistent. Where
Any new complication that's
uh, well, it's more of an evolution of things. Now, as far as from a technological standpoint, I mentioned a brand called Grand Seiko earlier as being one that I know if somebody's wearing one, that they did some research on it, that they know a little bit about watches. And at Watches and Wonders this year, they released a new version of their spring drive movement. Um, spring drive is, in layman's terms, the hybrid of watch movements, where it's a spring-powered watch, but it does still use a quartz oscillator and an integrated circuit to regulate the timekeeping. And so up until this point, the accuracy of that was plus or minus, for the higher model of the spring drive movements, plus or minus 10 seconds per month, or less than half a second per day. The previous version was plus or minus 15 seconds per month, which for a spring powered watch, for an automatic watch, that's incredible. That's quartz levels of accuracy from a watch that has no battery. The newest version that they're releasing right about now, they're calling the ultra fine accuracy, the UFA, and I believe they are rating it at plus or minus 20 seconds per year. So that's a
wow.
huge leap in accuracy, and just so I'll be interested to see that watch. They've also kind of downsized the movement a little bit and are able to get into slightly smaller watches, which is kind of along what I prefer. So yeah,
You're
I'm
not a
looking forward.
big dial guy.
Generally, no. I've got schoolboy wrists, and so the big watches don't tend to work well with my anatomy.
I'm not a small guy, but I'm not a huge fan of I don't need something big and clunky. I don't know. Sometimes some of them feel too cumbersome. Is Grand Seiko your favorite watch? I'm just curious if you have a favorite brand. Maybe that's a tough one. Like, what's your favorite band? I don't know. I like too many, but
Steve, that's like saying which one's your favorite kid. Um, uh, so many different brands offer so many different
I
things.
bet we all have one.
Well, I don't have kids, but I have a cat, but just one, and so he's my favorite cat. Um, I have a number of brands that I respect and admire for the things that they do, and some of them for different reasons. Um, Tudor, I think, is fantastic at really listening to the enthusiast market and taking feedback and kind of zeroing in on what enthusiasts want to see in a watch, and have been releasing some real bangers. Um, the aforementioned Grand Seiko, I think, is unmatched in its kind of precision and pursuit of perfection in almost everything that they do, from the precision of the movements to the hand finishing of their cases and uh, dial hardware. Um, from a movement manufacturer or movement finishing standpoint, I'm also a fan of German watches. I'm wearing a German watch right now. So Glashütte Original is a fantastic brand, and I think they do amazing work for a very reasonable price for what you get. Um, and I think, yeah, I mean,
So speaking of that, Jason, let me ask you this. And if you were advising a young professional who is just moving him or herself up into the strata of the executive world and wanted to present his or her persona, and at the same time didn't want to go out and irresponsibly buy something that they would require a mortgage on, where would you? I mean, you mentioned Grand Seiko here, and it's pretty high end, a different company from Seiko, I think, but they came from each other, I suppose. But where would you advise someone to start?
a lot of that does depend on how much they're willing to spend for that first luxury watch.
Say like somebody wants a good watch that can you buy anything nice for like $1,000 to $2,000, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, it's a very diverse market. Um, Now, if somebody's looking for a certain level of brand name cachet, there are brands like Hamilton is in the under $1,000 category, generally speaking. They have a long history of watchmaking, started out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, actually, and eventually moved operations to Switzerland. Um, Longines is a very historic brand. They have over 190 years of history at this point. Fun fact, Longines' winged hourglass logo is the oldest registered trademark that's still in use today. And that's not just in watches, that's in the whole world. Yeah. And you can get into a very nice Longines in that kind of sub $2,000 range. And then if you get into independents and micro brands, kind of the world is your oyster. It really depends on the style that you're looking for, different fit and finish. If you're looking for a complication, um, because watches can be so personal, and even in a person's collection can be varied. It's very easy for one person to have a dive watch, a GMT, a chronograph, a dress watch, kind of an everyday sort of beater watch. So that's where somebody like me would come in to really kind of probe and ask those exploratory questions of what appeals to you, right? It
So
is
say
such
I
a
wanted a
personal thing.
watch that looked like the rectangle watch that Cartier makes or
Hmm.
made, that real
Hmm.
famous fancy one. What's a
Hmm.
cheap version of that?
The
Not
cheap,
Canal Street cheap,
sure.
but what's
Let's say inexpensive there, Steve from Jersey.
Well, we can go with cheap on this one because you can get what many enthusiasts call so the watch you're referring to, I assume, is the RTA tank.
yeah,
Um,
like I'm looking for the poor, like you know how they used to call the Chrysler 300 the poor man's Bentley.
Yeah.
What's that?
The poor man's Cartier tank would be the Seiko tank. So
Ah,
Seiko has a kind of an entry level oriented line called the Seiko Essentials line. And there is a watch in that line that is very, very similar in design to a Cartier tank. Uh, and it's, last I checked, under $200.
oh wow, okay, gotcha.
So
Um,
that term would be an homage, if I get the lingo correctly.
I guess you could call it that. Yeah, because the story goes that Louis Cartier created that particular design based on his experience in World War One, and so it's called the Cartier tank because it was inspired by the actual architecture of a tank. So if you look at a tank from the top down, you have the tank tracks on the side, and that would be the side kind of lugs, and it's a rectangular piece. And then even you can even go so far as to saying like the hands are kind of like the turret on top of the tank. So I believe that he was probably the first one to design a watch like that, and any derivative thereof would be inspired or an homage of.
To pay respect to that particular design in a different brand and so on, I think is the fair way to describe it. So, Jason, you have definitely proved you are an expert. You are an expert to us. We're running a little short on time here, but have we missed anything? Is there anything else that you really want to add in here, Jason? And then, Stephen, maybe you got a question to finish up with?
Steve, why don't you go and shoot any questions you may have?
Sure. I had two questions actually. First, do you know what is the most popular watch in the world? And maybe you don't know this offhand, but I was or watch brand. I was just curious.
I would say it goes back to Rolex. So I guess, and it also depends on how you quantify or qualify popular. Um, Rolex is probably the best known brand in the world as far as luxury watches goes, because you go anywhere, nearly anywhere in the world, and somebody will know what Rolex is. They'll be able to recognize the logo and the coronet crown design and know what it stands for. So they've really kind of cornered the market in terms of that level of marketing. And they've been around long enough. 1905, I believe it
Yeah.
was, that they started. So yeah, I'd probably stick with Rolexes.
It's even in one of my favorite movies, Die Hard. Bruce McClane, John McClane's wife, she got a Rolex from the Nakatomi Corporation.
Okay, yeah.
So they're everywhere. Even though 80s on.
Yippee-ki-yay.
When did they first start becoming big? I'm sorry, Don.
I said yippee-ki-yay without finishing that phrase.
Oh yeah, no, don't do that.
Friendly.
I'll have to get the bleep button out again. My second question, for a good timepiece, a Rolex, a Patek Philippe, how do you pronounce the AP one? I'm really showing my ignorance here.
Audemars Piguet.
Okay, that one. Like, how long do those watches take to actually to create?
Okay, so when we're talking about luxury watches, there are mass-produced luxury watches, and there are what we call high horology or haute horology, to use the French again. High horology pieces are ones that emphasize hand building, hand finishing, hand assembly, to the point where on some watches they will use a stick, a literal piece of wood with a polishing compound to polish bevels on each of the bridge components of a movement. That's hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of man hours, and so it can take months to finish a single movement in those instances. Rolex is really the industry giant in that they are not a public company, so they don't have to publish or this they don't have to disclose what their production
They don't
numbers
have to be
are.
transparent as to their financials or anything for that matter.
Right. But estimates have it as where they produce over 1 million watches a year. There's not a lot of hand finishing going on when you're cranking out 1 million plus watches in a year. So that would take hours maybe just to produce the watch. Now, if we're talking about from scratch, a brand new design, a brand new movement, that will take months, if not years, to really conceptualize and fine tune a design. But if that's all done and we're just talking about production, can be really short or it can be really long. And the really long ones are the ones that cost a lot of money.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Well, on that note, Jason, we really, really thank you for being part of the Don Sullivan Show, and hope that we haven't turned you off too much on the whole process with some of our little technical difficulties here. But this is a show about technology, and I certainly would love to have a follow-up episodes about replicas, about the pre-owned market, the concept of the Frankenwatch, where various different parts that are not original from that particular manufacturer are included without necessarily them knowing about it, and the process that companies are going through to try to prevent that. This is an incredibly fascinating industry, and I thank you enormously for starting off this whole mini-series of the Don Sullivan Show. So, you got anything else to add before we close this one out? You, Jason, or Steve?
No, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate the invites to join you guys to just talk about watches. It's something that I can go hours and hours on, and so I appreciate that we're kind of cutting us off so that we don't take up all of the rest of our evenings just talking about watches. But be happy to join again for part 2, 3, however many it takes. I've had a blast. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much.
Oh, you did
No,
it
this was
all. It's
perfect.
incredibly interesting information. And we're going to love if you go and watch some of these or listen to some of our different episodes, they're on subjects ranging from pickleball to how bad bread is for you. And this is an incredibly fun and non-dour type of subject that is very new to us. So what about you, Steve? Anything else?
Oh, I could throw questions at Jason all night, but I think with respect to our time and our listeners as well, we can close here. But Jason, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Yes, Jason, thank you. And folks, all of the vast audience of the Don Sullivan Show, remember, download everything, support our sponsors, and always remember that all at-bats are situational. And thank you all.